Hello and a very warm welcome to Sporting Lives, where we showcase the story of someone who's been involved in sport with distinction in whatever way that has manifested itself. In the case of today's guest, he holds the distinction of being the first British goalkeeper to command a £1 million transfer fee when he signed for Crystal Palace in 1989. He's also holds the distinction of being Cornish, and he's played 23 times for England, a rare distinction for a Cornishman. As a full international footballer. There were UEFA and Champions League semi-finals in a 7-year spell with Leeds United that subsequently had more than one fan poll voting him the club's all-time greatest goalkeeper. Knowing the Yorkshire approach to southern softies, as it were, that's probably his greatest achievement. Welcome along, Nigel Martyn.
Thank you, good to be here.
We've got loads to talk about, not least your passion for cricket, but we'll leave that to a little bit later on because, of course, it was football where you made your name. How did all that begin for a youngster down in Cornwall?
Playing non-league football in Cornwall, actually giving up football once I'd left school, and my brother's works team was short one Saturday, and he said, my brother's quite handy over the park and when we have a kick around and that sort of thing, you know, and they sort of said, yeah, just tell him to come along. So I did that, happily played for that sort of team in the Duchy League down in Cornwall, which is just about the lowest league there is, for a couple of seasons, then moved to more senior football in Cornwall with Bugle and then on to St Blaise. And whilst I was at St Blaise, unbeknown to me, there was a guy that owned a carpet shop in St Blaise. He knew the tea lady at Bristol Rovers. And he rang her. She went in and saw Jerry Francis, and Jerry said, well, get him up for a trial.
That all sounds like a bit of a seamless transition in terms of sort of youth football, but it's pretty competitive wherever you are in this country. There's so much talent around, so many people playing the game. Was it as easy as it sounds going through those ranks?
No, I mean, I played boys football and school football, you know, right the way up through. But when I actually left school, I stopped playing. So for probably 6 months, 8 months, I didn't play any sort of sport at all. And it was just, you know, a chance thing that my brother's works team was short, which got me back playing. I didn't really have any aspirations about playing professionally. Just wanted to enjoy it, and literally got somebody to, or I didn't get them, somebody actually just on their own bat just recommended me for a trial, and you know, once you get that trial, it's worth having a go. So that's what I did.
When you played in that sort of school, youth, junior football, were you always playing in goals then, or did you want to be a striker like the rest of us and score the glory goals?
No, I wanted to be a goalkeeper, but I wasn't allowed to play in goal. So at school level, I was, you know, playing for the year above at right wing, and then centre forward, and for my sort of boys football on a Saturday morning or a Sunday, it was again right wing, right midfield, centre forward, that sort of thing. That was where I played, but always wanted to play in goal. So you know, in the downtime as kids, when we'd kick around over the park, I was always in goal. And
the cricket thing, as I say, we'll talk about it in a bit more detail later. But were you also doing that and sort of doubling up with the sports like, again, lots of young lads do?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, school cricket. I managed to play cricket for Cornwall schools. Managed to go through on the Cornish rugby as well. Qualified, you know, in for that. But I didn't make it at football for Cornwall at school level. So that was, you know, a little bit disappointing. But no, the cricket thing was always there, but it sort of probably always played a slight second fiddle, because you'd have, you know, like a lap over of games, maybe a couple of games at the end of, say, your football season might, you know, clash with your cricket, and football certainly was the one that I played most.
So how did you feel when you got the nod to go for a trial with Jerry Francis involved at Bristol Rovers? Because, you know, Jerry Francis, for those of us who've never played professional sport, big name at the time. He captained England back in the 70s, and he'd you know, had quite a nice managerial career. Very, very well-known figure. Nerves?
No, not really. I had nothing to lose. I was working in a plastics factory in Cornwall doing 12-hour shifts. You know, that's once you've got an opportunity to go and you know, go on trial and, you know, become a professional footballer. I didn't have anything to lose. That was the way I looked at it. I just went and sort of did my best and worked as hard as I could.
And how was he with you? Was he a good guy to mentor, to work alongside?
Yeah, he was fantastic. You know, that's the type of first manager that you need, really. He was dealing in the old third division, so he knew slightly limited players, and he knew how to get the best out of them. And all the players respected him, looked up to him, because obviously being the England captain, there was a couple of journeys where there would be a videotape put on of Jerry playing for England and captaining England, and him sort of asking us to count how many times he gave the ball away whilst the video was on, which was of course 0. So he was great for somebody to look up to. And his number 2 was Kenny Hibbert as well. So Kenny had had a great career playing Division 1 football at Wolves and other teams. So the two of them had a load of experience that they were happy to pass on, which was great for newcomers.
And in terms of who did you work with goalkeeper wise, did you feel that you'd made a big sort of improvement in those early days by working with somebody full time?
I worked with Roy Dolling, who was the physiotherapist. As you do. I mean, he was a goalkeeper, so he would have played sort of non-league football in and around the Bristol and Bath area. And so it was just a case of, after training, Roy would come out the physio block and get a bag of balls, and we'd go off and he just worked me into the ground. It was really old-fashioned stuff, up dive, side to side, literally just working me into the ground. But it made me stronger, gave me more strength. It wasn't necessarily technical work, but it was just hard physical graft, which gives you your base for goalkeeping, really.
And did you do that sort of thing that Peter Shilton used to do on TV, where you faced the wrong way and somebody took a penalty at you or whatever, and you tried to say... That came into the goalkeeping sessions as I went on. It wasn't something necessarily we would do with Roy, but subsequent goalkeepers, coaches, you work with, sometimes you're facing away from the ball, and it's a case of getting your head round and your body around and getting set as quickly as you can for the shot. Sounds like a really happy start then to your professional footballing career, with good times at Rovers. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we were favourites for relegation when I went there, so again there was no great expectations, and probably for the first half of the season we sort of lived up to that billing. But then towards the end of the season, you could see that Jerry was moulding us into a really good side, and we sort of went on a run at the end of the season. I think we lost, it was 1 in 13 games, and we had 12 clean sheets in 13 games as well towards the end of that season, and you could really see the improvement that was happening. So we finished 8th that year, and the following year we got into the playoffs. So from being relegation favourites, he turned it around with just getting a few people out of non-league football and moulding us into a good team.
Yeah, good managerial qualities then, and clearly great at working on that sort of team ethic and team spirit and cohesion that whatever level of sport you play, Absolutely. You need if you're going to be successful. So we get then to 1989. You mentioned the 12 clean sheets out of 13 games with Bristol Rovers. That obviously reflects well on the guys who are playing in front of you, but certainly reflects well on you between the posts there. Were you starting to get then noticed? Was the odd nudge or call or whatever, trying to catch your eye and maybe think about improvement, transfers?
Not so much at that stage, but by the end of that first season, I think Jerry had seen something in me, and he was big friends with Dave Sexton, who was obviously his old manager and probably a bit of a mentor for Jerry. And Dave was in charge of the under-21, so at the end of my first season, I got into the under-21 side, which, for a Bristol Rovers player wasn't, I was mixing it with Gaza and people, like this from the, at Tottenham and Arsenal players and Liverpool players. So it was a bit strange, to do that. It was really right at the back end of my career at Rovers that, the other clubs started to take notice, but I was really naive to it, to be honest. I just wanted to carry on playing and doing what I was doing.
And when we think about £1 million transfers, we always, certainly those who are our sort of age, if I can put myself in the same bracket, we think Trevor Francis, of course, the one that always stands out because he was the first, and those first few, the Kevin Reeveses and the Peter Barnes was more or less, wasn't he? I guess it sort of shows, though, unfortunately for a goalkeeper, the value of a goalkeeper in the general mindset by comparison to a forward, that it took another decade for a goalie to go for £1 million. But it's a proud stat, and when you're the first to do anything, nobody can ever take that away from you, Nigel. Is that something you sort of hang your hat on? Have you dined out on that?
I wouldn't say I dined out on it. No, I'm proud to have done it. There were other goalkeepers around at the same time. I think Dave Seaman went just after for 1.3. Tim Flowers went just after that again for over £1 million. And it was just a case of when it was going to happen, really. And I think it was a big thing for a club like Crystal Palace to do. And you would probably put that more on a Liverpool or a Manchester United or somebody like that to make the first move there. But fair play to them, they did it. And I think that's the important thing. Goalkeepers are very important. You see them now. They're 50 or 60 million pounds now, and I think managers are starting to realise that to get the one that you actually want, you might have to pay the same sort of fee as you would for a top midfielder.
Are you worth it?
It wasn't my valuation, so we say. It's difficult to say that any player was worth £1 million at that time. It was just the industry that we were in sort of dictated that was the price. I didn't put myself down as being as good as that, because it's just putting pressure on yourself. It was other people's valuation. That's what I kept saying. Come
on, of course you were. So it was Steve Coppell, I think, in one of his, he had more spells at Crystal Palace than Harry Potter, I suppose, something like that. I think he was the man in charge, wasn't he, at the time? How did it come about? When was the numbers, if you like, the million first raised, and what did you think?
I think it was raised in newspapers and things, and I didn't necessarily sort of read newspapers and things like that. But my father-in-law down in Cornwall was saying, "Oh, you've been linked with this, you've been linked with that," and nothing was coming through, to me. But it wasn't until Crystal Palace made the bid, and then sort of Jerry rang me and said, "Right, okay, we've had a bid, we've accepted it. It's down to you to go and talk to them," and that's what we did.
And it led to, your longest spell with the club, didn't it? In the end, 350 games or so, League and Cup, and a good time, once again, before Leeds United came knocking on the door. I mean, what are your memories of playing for Palace and those characters?
Yeah, I mean, it was an up-and-coming club, certainly in Division 1. They'd got promoted. They had really good players, Ian Wright, Mark Bright, Jeff Thomas, John Solako. They were all there at the time. But they were just struggling. It was their first season in the old Division 1, as it was, and they were just struggling a little bit near the bottom, and I think they just got done 9-0 by Liverpool. So I think it was a 9-0, and then it was a 5 at Notts Forest, and I think that was the point when I think Ron Notes, the chairman, sort of said, right, with the manager, we need to spend if we want to stay up, and they got myself and Andy Thorne from Wimbledon. And we sort of stopped the goals going in, if you like, at that time. And from there we went on a run. Got to the cup final that year, and the club went from strength to strength for those first 2 or 3 years. Is
that an exciting challenge then as a goalkeeper when the team's been shipping them in? If you can stop them, that makes you look like you really can do the job.
I think there was a few reasons. I don't think it was. You can blame Perry Suckling for letting in all the goals. If you look at the video, there's not a lot you can do about any of them. I think the team at the time was just defensively, for whatever reasons, couldn't quite do the job. So I think by making changes, it ups everyone's game a little bit. Not just the players that come in, but the players around them actually up their game as well. And Thorny was a good leader at the back, and he got the defence organised and whatever. And with myself, because I was still quite young and fairly inexperienced myself really at that time, so I was kind of learning as I was going as well a bit. But it certainly improved.
FA Cup final.
Yeah, gutted really. Possibly should have won it. Got within 6 minutes, and we try and play offside where we don't normally do, and Mark Hughes goes and scores a goal. I can remember making a save about 2 or 3 minutes before that from Paul Ince, where I sort of dived and tipped it over the bar, and I was thinking to myself, that could be the save that sort of helps us win it, but not to be. And my overriding memory from it really is I so wished the game had been finished on the day, be it, penalties or whatever, because it was such an anticlimax going back there a few days later. It just didn't have the same feel to it really, and the game was very, very droll really.
Is it a case of when that happens, and it's happened to a few people, but not that many in the history of football, that you go there on the first time you ever play in an FA Cup final, it's about the occasion, and then the second time it's more the game?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we had a big dinner and everything planned, which we had, but it just, everything seemed a bit empty. We weren't sitting there as winners or losers. It just, we've got to go back and do it again. It was, the build up and everything to the cup finals in them days it was a lot bigger. So we were certainly, I think you've climbed that mountain and you've reached the final and you want it to finish there, and it obviously it didn't, and it's still the FA Cup final. We still wanted to win it. We still gave everything we had to try and win it, but it just didn't have the same feeling.
Again, relating age-wise, growing up in the 70s, watching the cup finals in those days, I remember the players with the sort of top of the trophy on the head after the game, the bottle of milk behind the curtain with David Coleman or somebody interviewing him on the BBC, probably Brian Moore on ITV if you watch that. And that it was a massive build-up, one that you got daft things happening in the morning in the build-up to the game. You followed the players on the coach. It was a 3 o'clock kick-off. Everybody in the country seemed to watch it then. Do you hanker for those days? When you look back now, I know it's a fair way after your career's finished, but it's a totally different feel about the whole competition. Do you think it's been devalued, and is it worse, football worse for that?
I just think we have so much football on the telly now that it doesn't matter how big the game is, it's just another game. It can be a Champions League final, that sort of thing. I think the only thing really now that grips us in that way now is if England are going to do really well, getting to a World Cup semi-final, I think that got us all on the edge of our seats again. But, those days of, the FA Cup final, it was one of the very few live games that you would see. Maybe an England game in and out, and the cup final was pretty much it. The rest was highlights, match of the day, or the big match on a Sunday, that type of thing. So we didn't have it very often, so it was, you look forward to it for ages, but these days you've probably got 4 or 5 games, a week, that are on the telly. So it's certainly easier to watch games.
What was Steve Coppell like to work with?
He was great. He was great with me. He tried to keep things as simple as possible. Especially with my job, you just said, you basically stop the ball going in the goal, and distribution, that type of thing. He would say the things that he wanted me to do, which I did, and he was great to get on with. Really good manager. Didn't lose his cool very often. You knew if he did that, we weren't playing well enough, and that generally got the reaction it needed.
So how did things move on then to your move to Leeds United? What was the catalyst to that? Was it more ambition on your part? Did the club need a few quid and they decided that to cash in on Nigel Martyn at 2-point-something million or whatever it was a good idea for them? What was the situation?
Yeah, because we got to the cup final the following year. We finished 3rd in the old First Division, which would have got us into Europe and everything, but obviously the teams were banned at that time. And the following season, I think Wrighty left and went to Arsenal, and then Jeff Thomas left, and Mark Bright left, and all the sort of top stars sort of left, and we got relegated. And we had a young team at the time, a young Gareth Southgate coming through, and a young Chris Coleman, both international managers, since, but both in the team. And we get promoted again, so you're back in it, and then the following season you get relegated again, so it's sort of down, up, down. And I think the second time we got to the playoff final, the following year, and we lost in the final to Leicester. And I think the club then decided it was time to, cash in on me, really, whilst I was still, of a decent age that they could get good money for me.
So are you saying that they listed you, or was the word put out there that you were...
No, I'd signed a new contract in the March, and they sold me in the July.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of nailed my colours to the mast and sort of, right, this is where I want to be. And then, a new manager comes in, Dave Bassett, who obviously likes to move players on, and he probably thought, if I've got a player of value and he's the goalkeeper, then I might be able to get 3 or 4 outfield players for that money. So, from his point of view, it was a business decision. But for mine, it was, a chance to, go back and play in the Premier League again.
What was he like, Harry Bassett?
It was a very short spell. Pretty much what you see, very, set pieces, just getting the ball into certain areas, winning your individual battles with the people you're playing against. Pretty much what you see is what you get with him, really.
And also there, before we finish on Palace, you mentioned Brighty and Wrighty, 2 absolutely top draw players. 2 very interesting stories to tell themselves. So Brighty and Wrighty, get yourselves on Sporting Live's podcast. I'm sure we can sort that one out in the future. But what were they like to play with?
Great. Brighty was a very intelligent footballer. Had skills, could hold the ball up really well. Would win flick-ons for Wrighty. Wrighty was just as good a finisher as I think I probably trained against. It wasn't about whacking the ball in the net. He could side foot it, and he knew he would take it early before you could get set. He made it really awkward for goalkeepers. So, a lot of his goals are instinctive, and he was a great striker. But the pair of them up there together would terrorise a few defences these days, I think.
Mark Bright, intelligent football, but you've got to be, you might say Ian Wright, instinctive, but you've still got to be bright to know exactly what you're going to read those situations and to be able to get in there first and score as many goals as they did, both club and internationally. Yeah,
absolutely. Together, them two with we had a good midfield, Jeff Thomas and Andy Gray in midfield as well, and John Salako on the left wing was probably our major threat for getting balls into the box for Wrighty and Brighty, that sort of thing. But, those players were probably, as good as there was in the league at that point. Arsenal maybe and Liverpool had better teams, but they probably didn't have better, strikers. And Jeff, for a while, was probably the best midfielder in the country, I reckon.
There's no wonder the transfer fees kept going up then, Nigel, because Bristol Rovers making their own form of progress when you were there, Crystal Palace clearly making progress when you were there as well, and then Leeds United, a club who had been at the top for a decade, mid-60s to mid-70s, very well documented. Not a particularly steep decline, but they'd been second division side in the old second division for much of the 80s. And then back on the rise again when you sign, 1996, 7-year spell. And that was £2.25 million as well. Another record, I think, at the time for a goalkeeper.
Yeah, it was. It was. I was due to actually sign for Everton, and we were travelling up to Everton to basically sign the deal. Whilst we were on the motorway, my agent got a phone call saying that Leeds had matched the bid, and he just sort of said, "Look, it's in your interest. You want to speak to both parties, because." One could be sort of saying that, they're about to spend 50, 60 million and try and buy the league. So he said, you need to, for your, professionally, you need to go and speak to both. So we got to Everton. Joe Royal wasn't there. His wife was not particularly well at the time, so he wasn't there, which is, I fully understand and agree with him not being there. The chairman was away on business, and it was sort of left to a director to handle the situation. And when we said that to him, he panicked a little bit, and he actually gave us directions from the factory where we'd met to basically to get back onto the M62 to get across to Leeds. So when we got to Leeds, we met Howard Wilkinson and Bill Fotherby, and there was no way they were going to let us go back again, you know. So I went from one that was sort of giving us directions, you know, out of the place to the other where they were determined to keep me. So.
I can't imagine Howard Wilkinson, Sergeant Wilco's, of course, who was affectionately known, particularly by the Leeds fans, being a big salesman, if you like, about his club. He's straight talking Yorkshireman. Was he like that to work with?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I didn't work too long with him because it was probably only 5 or 6 games into that first season that he got the sack. So, you know, I can remember we went to Germany on a pre-season tour, and he came across and he said, right, okay, 2.25 million. Let's have a look at this. And he himself started to volley balls at me. Well, he was standing about 4 yards away, volleying a ball quite hard at me, which was sort of at my face. And I managed to get my hands up to it and sort of deflect it onto the bar. And he just looked at me and went, 2.25 million quid, and you can't even catch a ball from there, like, and just walked off. And I thought, you know. But it was just his way of just putting his stamping his mark on the situation. And I was fine, you know. It's how some managers are.
And what was that like for you then? What's the adjustment like when you've signed and you think you're going to be working for a fairly long term with a manager? I know managers, you know, there is a bit of a shelf life and there is a bit of a merry-go-round, but you wouldn't have turned up there, signed that deal, expecting him to have gone within 6 matches. No,
and you know that again. You know, you move your family. You know, my wife and it was just our son at that time. You know, we all move up from London, you know, lock, stock and barrel, and you know, a few games in, the manager goes, and Mark Beanie was the other goalkeeper at Leeds at the time, and I remember him, you know, coming over and saying, "New manager, this is an opportunity for me to try and, you know, force my way in," which is understandable and fair enough, and so it was a little bit unsettling, but we got George Graham, and I think George really sorted the team out and got it playing not the most attractive football in the world to start with, but it was good for me. You know, we got 23 clean sheets, I think, in the first season with George, which I think, but we didn't score many goals, so you know, it was pretty boring to watch, but it certainly kept us up. And then from there, you know, he went out and got some good players, and he got Jimmy Hasselbank and things like that, and Jimmy's goals, you know, get us into Europe, and you know, the way George organised, you know, or had the team organised, you know, we became really difficult to beat, and that's really where the sort of, you know, the better times that were around the corner were based on really George's work, if I'm honest.
So he built the foundation, because he pretty much brought a tag around his neck from Arsenal, you know, 1-0, didn't he? That was the sort of way that Arsenal won the game, that boring Arsenal. And for a couple of seasons it felt like that. I remember down at Elland Road, but you know, you're happy as Larry, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely.
To be playing behind a defence that's keeping things tight.
Yeah, absolutely, because that got me back into the England squad. You know, it's my performances were. I wasn't having a lot to do in those games, but you might have 1 or 2 saves, and if you make them and you keep another clean sheet and another clean sheet, and people start talking about that, then obviously that's what gets the England manager sort of looking. You know, I've certainly had better spells of where I felt I've been playing better and you don't get in, but you may have let, you know, a goal in or 2 goals in that you could do nothing about, but you feel like you're playing better. But it goes to show that it's the stats that really, you know, do make the heads turn of England managers, really.
And what do these guys like to work with when they're away from the camera? Because, you know, we're all aware that they speak to somebody like myself or a journo, and there's the party line, and there's the body language on camera. But what was a Howard Wilkinson, who probably came over pretty dour a lot of the time, and a George Graham similarly? Are they that way inclined anyway, or are they a bit of fun really when the cameras stop rolling?
They have their moments. I mean, no manager really. You don't see them laughing and joking that often with you. You know, it's a serious business at the end of the day, and I think part of being that manager is to be, you know, a bit away from his players really, and you know, I feel that players should have that respect for their manager and should, you know, look to him at all times. Whatever he's telling them to do is what you should do. Now, you know, not all players like to go that way, but I think, you know, if you should follow whatever your manager's trying to say. So I think it's important for them to look as though they're in authority at all times, and that's what George would do. He'd give the biggest rollickins to his centre forwards, his centre halves, and his goalkeeper. I could come in, it could be 0-0. I might have made 3 really good saves and feeling on top of the world, and George would say, you managed not to find our player from goal kicks for the last 3 kicks, and it would be like, hang on, you're going to mention the saves, but no, that wasn't him. He would be on top of his goalie and his 2 centre-halves and his 2 strikers, because he knew if those 5 were playing well, he'd win the game. So he really made sure that he kept on top of you.
Was that a bit of man management from him? I mean, did you respond more to that? Because there might be some people who go, well, if he's not going to praise me for the good stuff, then I don't want to play for this guy.
No, I just knew what he was doing. I wasn't silly enough. I knew I was maybe playing well in that game. And for him to say that, I used to go, look to Steve Sutton, who was the goalie coach, and go, so what's he on about? And he went, trust me, he's happy with you. It was just his way of keeping you on your toes for the second half.
So you sound like you're a bit of a goody two-shoes if you followed what the manager said all the time. And did you step out of line during your career? Is there any moments like that you can tell us about? I know there was the sort of an issue with Terry Venables, for example, later on. Was that anything induced by something you did, or was it just completely nothing?
Yeah, well, you can say it was induced by me. I played the whole of the season, 2001-2002 season, played every game, didn't miss a training session. Last game of the season, I think we had a day off, and then we joined up with the England squad, went to the World Cup, went to Dubai pre-season, did like another pre-season, went to the World Cup, Japan, South Korea, all involved with that. Came home, flew home, was home for about 12 days and had to report for pre-season training, which I know the Arsenal players, literally the moment they get knocked out of the World Cup, they have 1 month from that date to report. I had 12 days and I wasn't ready. I was happy to go in and train and do everything. What I didn't want to do was suddenly jump on an airplane again and go to China, Australia, and Thailand, I think it was, on another trip. I'd just done that, and I really just didn't want to do it. And Terry was the manager, but he'd taken over, but he wasn't at the club. So when I said that I didn't want to go on the trip, I was out training on the pitch, and Eddie Gray came over to me, and Eddie said, Nigel, the manager's going to call. Can you go into his office? He's going to call in the next 10, 15 minutes, and he wants to have a word. So I was like, yeah, okay, no worries. So I ran in, covered in mud, took an outer layer off, if you like, and boots and stuff, and stood sort of outside his office, and his secretary was there, and I said, where is he? He's been the manager for a few days, and he's, we've not seen him. And she went, oh, he's just away filming Wish You Were Here at the moment. So he obviously had a previous contract that he had to fulfill. So I went in, picked up the phone when it rang, and he said, Nigel, what's this? You don't want to come on the trip? And I said, Terry, you know what it's like away with England. I've done that. I just need a break. I need to be home. I need to spend some time with my family. I'm happy to come in and train with the kids, whatever. If you want me to train, I'm happy to do that. I'm not saying I need more time away, but I just don't want to get on an airplane and go to another hotel and everything like that. So he just basically said, okay, if you're not going to come, then I'm not going to pick you again. So that was it.
Black and white.
And so I said, well, just to let you know how I'm feeling right at this moment, I don't care. And that was the conversation. And he put the phone down. He came in a few days later, didn't speak. The lads went off to did the tour, came back. I was training with the kids, and Danny Milosevic was the number 2 goalie behind Paul. And then on the Thursday before the start of the season, he came up to me and said, I'm going to put you on the bench for Saturday. And that was it, and walked off. So, he'd sort of alienated me. He's now alienated Danny Milosevic, who played all the pre-season games with Paul and thought he was going to be on the bench. And then, he was absolutely gutted, and I was gutted for him because he's such a nice lad. And, that was it. And, I just spent the whole season sat on the bench, and the team went from qualifying from Europe and whatever to just staying up at the end of the season. It's a sad decline.
It was. Is it something then that does that still? I mean, the way that I'm reading that from this side of the desk, that still rankles with you. Is it, you know, is Terry Venables on the Christmas card list? Have you had anything to do with him at all since then? Or are you mates again? Or
No.
Were you ever mates in the first place?
No, I'd had no sort of dealings with him. I was picked for an England B game when I was playing at Palace, because when he was England manager, Palace had gone down, so he wasn't going to pick anyone from, you know, what is the Championship now, and so, you know, he liked Ian Walker as well, who was the Tottenham keeper. So he was like third keeper, you know, behind Tim Flowers and David Seaman. So all the way through Terry's reign as England manager, I wasn't anywhere near it. No, it was the first time that we'd really come together, and it was just an unfortunate situation. You know, I'd had enough of flying around and doing all that at that point, and I guess he just felt that. He probably thought one of his senior players was messing him around. I was just being honest. You know, that is the truth of the matter. I was just being totally honest. And, you know, you could have spoken to Eddie or Eddie Gray or Steve Sutton, and he could have found out the type of guy I was. I'm not a troublemaker. I just come in, do my work, and go home, sort of thing. So it was a bit disappointing, but obviously it was an opportunity for Paul, and you know, he came into the team, and although the team struggled, Paul did really well. So, you know, it was a good thing for him.
And of course, that led to your move to Everton, where eventually things wind up after an injury 2 or 3 years later. We'll come back and touch on that in a minute, but I just thought that it was pertinent at that moment to mention the Venables thing. So we've missed out a whole chunk at Leeds, which was a pretty damn good chunk. Probably your favourite chunk of your career, because there's the build-up towards getting to the UEFA Cup semi-final, then there's a Champions League semi-final. We know, of course, what happened after that with the financial issues at the club, but during that period is when you're playing the predominance of your 23 England caps as well. Good times in the late 90s and early noughties. Yeah,
they were. That was probably the best side that I actually played in, that Leeds side of that era. Yeah, it was George's, you know, got us playing in a certain way and made us difficult to beat, and we had, you know, strikers who could get us goals, so we you know, we kept progressing, you know, and George got us to you know, got us into Europe, and then you know, the second time around, UEFA Cup semi-final, my overriding well, not memory but thoughts now when I look back on it now is, I wish we hadn't played that first semi-final, even if it meant us getting kicked out of it. You know, 2 of our fans had gone over there to support us, and you know, they were just, that was just a shocking sort of thing to happen, and I so wish as players we said, well, at the time we didn't feel like playing, but we were told we had to play. The game has to go ahead, and I just feel like even if it was just me who'd said, well, actually I'm not going to. You know, some things are more important. That's what I'd like to have done now. That's what I think we should have done. But we didn't. And we played the game, and they were actually a fairly decent side themselves. You know, they went on to beat Arsenal in the final, so they, you know, there were no mugs, certainly. So, you know, that was a slightly disappointing thing. But, you know, professionally, we were on the up, and then George leaves, and David takes over, and, you know, at that time we had, you know, the likes of Jonathan Woodgate, Harry Kewell, which, you know, George had both, you know, put them in the team and taken them out, you know, a few times, and then, you know, David put them in sort of permanently, and the team got even better, and, you know, we got the Champions League semi-final, the great run that we had in that competition, and the, you know, the evenings with the supporters and things like that live long in the memory. You know, they were really great times, and you know, we got fairly close.
Yeah, which, I mean, out of any of those, can you pick out 1 or 2 that really do stand out for you, that, you know, the goosebumps still reappear when you think about it?
AC Milan at home when Lee Bowyer scores. On a wet night, I think we were missing 3 or 4 of our sort of best players. I think Danny Mills and Don Matteo played centre-half. You know, we weren't at our strongest, but you know, we dug in. It was a rainy night, and you know, Lee he hit it pretty well. Obviously, the goalie should do better, and he sort of patted it down and back between his legs, and it goes in, and the place just erupted, and it was proper noise. Do you know what I mean? But it was then then it was backs to the wall a little bit after that. But we rode out the storm, and that was a great win. That was players and supporters giving absolutely everything they had. The people on the sidelines are screaming and shouting and doing everything they can, and the players on the pitch are doing everything they can to hold on to that 1-0 lead, and that's basically what got us through to the next round.
And any more?
Well,
in the actual Champions League semi itself?
The semi itself, I think the quarter-final was better when we beat Deportivo at home. We absolutely hammered them 3-0. And it was, if you ever had two games that were poles apart, we hammered them at our place, and we went over there and they absolutely gave us a footballing lesson. And we, struggled to, we lost 2-0 and sneaked through. That could have been 6 or 7 on any other day, but we managed to hold on. And then the semi-final, at our place we played really well, and we had some opportunities, and their goalie actually played really well. And then over there, for 15-20 minutes, we seemed in control and nothing really going on. And then they get a cross comes across, it gets deflected off Harty, and then it comes across the face of goal, and the guy sticks it in with his arm, and it just feels a bad way to lose that goal. And I think that the way that they'd scored affected us really, and I think the wheels came off a bit after that.
Yeah, I remember it well, very well, all too well, in fact. But barring that, was a 3-0 defeat in the second leg, 3-0 defeat on aggregate, and the dream shattered. Fourth in the Premier League, though, so I mean that is a very, very good team. When you think about the consistency that you have to show to get to a Champions League semi and still to finish fourth in the league in a very competitive Premiership, it might have been in those days. I'm just looking at some of the names down here. The Gary Kellys, you mentioned Ian Hart, Lucas Radebe, of course, skippering, Jonathan Woodgate, Mark Viduka, Harry Kewell, who just sort of come on the scene, hadn't he? Michael Bridges, who, such a shame he got as many injuries as he did, because he was a class striker. Robbie Keane was on loan with you, and Alan Smith, the local lad, did good. You mentioned, I think, Danny Mills, Rio Ferdinand, of course, David Batty. That's a side.
Yeah, Oliver Decor and Eric Bakker as well. It was a great squad. Don Matteo as well. It was a really strong squad we had there. It probably just wasn't deep enough. If you want to, compete with, it would be Man United and Arsenal at the time, with the two real top sides, and probably us and Liverpool and Newcastle perhaps. Were fighting for the next bit, but Man United and Arsenal just had deeper squads. They could call on internationals, right the way down through. They could probably do without probably 5 players and still put a really strong team out. Whereas if we were without 5, we might then start to struggle a little bit. And I think over the course of the season, that probably meant that we finished a little bit behind them.
What are your thoughts then on what then comes after that, as far as Leeds United are concerned? Not that long ago, actually went to an audience with Peter Ridsdale, would you believe, who was, of course, the chairman, as you well know, in those days. And the fact that he didn't qualify for a second Champions League, for the Champions League final, I should say, and then things started to spiral out of control. I know you go relatively soon after that, and Terry Venables come in, as we've alluded to already, but the element of sadness when you look back at that because of the way things had been for a few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as players, you're not aware of what's happening. Yes, we were buying players, but we were having, sponsorship deals were happening as well. There was the Lurpak, 10 million or something, and Sky, I think, put 10 million in. So you're spending, yes, we were spending probably close to 60 or 70, but you're thinking, well, there is money coming in as well. You just think the club can afford to do it. That's the overriding thing as players. You're unaware of that. You just get on with your job. But then once we lost that semi-final, and the following season we sort of limped to a sort of fifth, I think we were, and just got into the UEFA Cup again, which wasn't really quite good enough. And then the following season, you know, David goes and Terry comes in, and you know, players are sold. You know, Rio went, and you know, once players start going out the door, you know, it's going to be more and more difficult. You know, and the quality coming the other way to replace them wasn't the same. So we did start to struggle. But at this point, you know, I'm on the bench. There's nothing I can do from there. That's quite frustrating. You know, you want to be involved, but you know that we just managed to stay up at the. You know, I think we won at Arsenal, which probably just about kept us up. And then the start of the next season, I'm still at Leeds, and I'm fighting for my place with Robbo, and you know, I get told, you know, by the manager at the time that whoever does best in pre-season starts. I let in probably 3 less goals and did probably equally as well as Paul, but then to be told that I wasn't going to start, you know, and it was more down to financial thing. Robbo was worth money, so they had to put him in the shop window. So you know, I was told then that I wouldn't be playing, and it would be probably best if I could try and find another club. And you know, when you're at a club and you love being there, and you enjoy doing your best for a club, and you enjoy being there with the supporters and everything, and then you're told you should go and try and find somewhere else. So that was really difficult. Chelsea came in for me, but I didn't want to move back to London at that time. And Everton came in, and I'd spoken to Chris Woods, who was the goalie coach over there, who I'd played in the England squads with and played against him loads of times. And you know, he said the manager's really keen on you. Would you come? And I said yes. You know, at this point now, I'm going into my second season of not playing. And I want to finish my career playing. You know, I don't want to finish it just, you know, sat on the bench. And so he said okay. And David Moyes was quite thorough in his sort of scouting of me. He spoke to quite a lot of people, I found out subsequently. And you know, it sort of dragged on a few weeks. So it was right on the deadline day. You know, the 1st of September when he made the move. And I remember the conversation with him. He said, look, I've got Richard Wright. I've paid a lot of money for him. He's done okay, but he's not done brilliantly. He's got a knee problem. If he comes out of the team and you go in and you do well, then you stay in the team. And it was the first game. Richard told me afterwards he shouldn't have played because his knee was that bad, but he was trying to keep me out of the team. I came on after about 25 minutes or whatever. We drew 2-2. Alan Shearer penalties went in past me. And then, you know, I got back in and got back into playing again. And that was the best thing that could have happened, you know. And I had, you know, 2.5 really great seasons at Everton that I absolutely loved.
Come back to that in a sec, but just to remind you, you are listening to or watching Sporting Lives with myself, Jonathan Doidge, and Nigel Martyn, my guest for the day. And if you are enjoying what you're watching or what you're listening to, please subscribe to whatever it is that you are seeing this or hearing this on. My thanks as well to Independent Content Services, ICS, for the use of their studio, to Ian Holding and to Julian Barnes, who've helped facilitate this today. So back on with Nigel's career, Everton, and you know, if you put it in context like this, if you go to Newcastle and follow Alan Shearer in as the striker, there's going to be some pressure. If you turn up at Elland Road with a number 4 on your back, people are going to think, is he as good as Bremner? If you go to Everton as a goalkeeper, big Neville Southall, and you are... You
know, they've had Thomas Myra played, Paul Gerrard, Steve Simonson and Richard Wright had all sort of done the job for probably the period I was at Leeds. But like, they hadn't had somebody sort of long term. So I went there, I just turned 37, so, you know, I didn't have long myself. So, you know, to go there, and that was the season, obviously, that, you know, it wasn't the greatest Everton team in the world, but they were well organised. The manager got them really well organised. Dave David Moyes is a great manager at organising his teams. And, it was a backs-to-the-wall effort, and, we managed to stay up with, if I'm being honest, not as good a squad as they had at Leeds. So it wasn't like satisfaction, well, I've helped another team stay up and Leeds have gone down. I was gutted they'd gone down because they're still, a lot of those players are still my mates, and I didn't want them to go down. I was gutted for the supporters that they went down, but, personally, I was pleased. And I was pleased with the way that I played and my contribution to helping us stay up that season. And then moving on, to the next season, we finished fourth bottom the first season. I'm there. The next season, we finished fourth and we qualified for the Champions League. And, that's quite a big achievement for basically the same squad of players again to turn it around as much as we did.
And then, of course, the injury hits on it, and you decide to wind things up. One thing we haven't talked about, arguably the most important thing, might not be to you, don't know. England, 23 caps, we mentioned at the very top of the piece. And I looked down your England appearances, none against home international sides, because, of course, the home internationals had finished them, which seems a bit weird, really, when you've played 20-odd times, because in our younger days, when you looked at internationals, and if they'd played 20-odd, you'd probably guarantee a couple of Wales games and a Scotland match in there. And other things that stuck out, well, managers you played for, one appearance when Howard Wilkinson was caretaker there, Graham Taylor, 3 matches under his jurisdiction, 5 apiece for Glenn Hoddle and Kevin Keegan, and 9 for Sven. What was it like working with all those guys? And let's talk about the moment you found out you were playing your first international.
Well, first of all, getting picked in the England squad is the first step, and that's a pretty amazing thing. I was rooming with Gary Lineker, so you can imagine in 1987 I was working in the plastics factory, and probably 1990, just after the World Cup, it was the first England get-together after the World Cup in Italy in 1990, and I just went to the reception, got my key, went in, opened the door, and there's Gary Lineker sort of sitting on the bed, and it's a little bit surreal for
But he said, sorry, I got the wrong room.
Pretty much, and he jokingly sort of said, I'll get the kettle on, sort of thing, and I was like really naive, walking over to put the kettle on, and he went, no, I'm only joking, you don't have to do that. But I think that was probably Graham Taylor putting like a senior player with a new player, that type of thing. And he sort of, for those first sort of few years, or first couple of years really with the England squad, he sort of helped you through the ropes and everything. But then to actually make my debut we were in Russia, or in the CIS as it was then, and Chris Woods is playing, and it's just a normal game for me. I'm sat on the bench for England again, which I'd done quite a few times at that point. And then Graham Taylor just looks over to me and goes, right, now to go and warm up, you're coming on. And I think by the time I got on, there was about 12 minutes left. So, I got on, and it was 2-2 at the time, and it finished 2-2. And I just remember running on there thinking, don't mess up this goal kick, because I had to go. It was a goal kick was the first thing I had to do, and I managed to get it away. And the game really, I had nothing to do apart from roll the ball out a few times to defenders. It's played completely differently international football to what the Premier League was at that time. So it was great. And Gary Lineker said, well, your name's changed now. It's now Nigel Martyn of Crystal Palace and England. So he said that is a big step, and I remember him telling me that.
And of course, David Seaman was the man, wasn't he, at the time in terms of possession. What's it like then when you desperately want to be number one, but none of those managers are particularly giving you that nod? You are kind of there giving you a game to make sure that you're still sharp and playing at international level. But when it comes to the competitive matches, he was getting the gig. Do you feel a bit green about that? Or do you just accept it as part of professionalism? You can only do what you can do? I
accepted it, and I accepted it because he did such a good job. Had he not been playing well in those games, then you might feel that you have some grievance, but he was an exceptional goalkeeper. I'd go as far as to say we've had probably 3 greats. If you're going to go back to Gordon Banks. He won the World Cup. He's a great. Peter Shilton was a great for us, and I think David Seaman's the other great goalkeeper that we've had. We've had lots of good goalkeepers, but I think those are the three that you could actually say were great, and that's how I have to square it off in my mind. That he was doing such a good job, and he was playing at a team that was winning titles and things like that, whereas we were really just pushing for it. I managed to get voted into the Premier League team 3 years in a row and things like that. So you could say your league form, perhaps you were doing better, but every time he put that England shirt on, he always did well, really, right up until his last one. And then that was unfortunately my last one as well.
But that's one of those things about goalkeeping. It's a bit strange when you're thinking about who can do the job and how to select somebody, because if the person who gets picked is playing in championship or contending sides, and you might not necessarily be doing that, if they're playing in a side that's that good, surely they're going to get less opportunity to show what they can do between the sticks.
I think it goes back to what we were saying about earlier. They're keeping lots of clean sheets and only making 1 or 2 saves, and they just look at unbeatable then, don't they?
So it's a perception rather than a reality?
No, not really, because he was also, in training with him, you could see how good he was. And he was a really good goalkeeper. Watching him at Arsenal or whatever, he rarely had a bad game. It's not very often you saw him got flustered. And when he was flustered, that was when he was really at his worst. But that I didn't see that very often. He was such a level-headed guy and didn't get too emotional in games that often. And that's why his consistency was as good as it was.
To play for England, is that just everything? Doesn't matter who you're playing against and where it is and what it is?
Yeah, I mean, for a player that isn't necessarily in the starting 11 of his manager, it's vital every time you pull the shirt on that you perform, that you are next in line and ready if the other guy is out. The game against. Who do we play now? I'm trying to remember now. That we drew Greece when we drew 2-2. And
Old Trafford.
Yeah, Old Trafford, where David Beckham sticks it in the corner in the last minute. Well, Dave injured his shoulder like 2 days before the game and was out. And, you want the gig. And it's I would say it's harder being a number 2 and having to come in. If you're that number 1 and it's kind of easier, you just turn up and do your thing. But when you're the number 2, it's you're suddenly like people, oh, it's not Dave, it's and you don't have to go and prove yourself. You just got to let the game happen, and you just got to try and play it how you would naturally play it. But there were certainly people that perhaps found it different that I was behind there and not Dave, but. On the day I had a fairly decent game, even though it was 2-2. We, at 2-1 down, I've made a couple of pretty important saves that if it had gone 3-1, we wouldn't have got through. But I was quite happy with the way I played on the day, and then obviously David Beckham sticks one in the top corner, and the country goes mad, and we all love him again.
Yeah, that was a bit of a roller coaster back in those days. I could probably spend another hour talking about that. But so. In terms of working alongside somebody like David Seaman and at England level, effectively therefore being his understudy, for want of a better expression, are you supportive of each other in those positions when you're rivals but also squad mates?
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit different than some in that respect. Some people will go there and it'll just be, you can see a burning ambition to knock this guy off his perch, but we're all training together, and all I do is when it's my turn to go in, I just do as well as I can, as well as I possibly can, and work as hard as I can. That's kind of how I did it. I didn't, do it so I didn't make things awkward for Dave. So as the other goalie or other goalies, you're doing a lot of the serving. So for instance, your serving could be bad and make him look bad. You can certainly do things like that if you were, that way inclined. I'd never do that. I'd just try and, get him the best serving that he can have, especially once the game's picked. my job is to serve him, and get him as confident as he can be for, because at the end of the day, it's the country that matters rather than the individual.
Good to hear. Got to be professional, which leads me on then to, if we can just change tack slightly, to cricket, because we touched on it earlier that you played as a youngster. I'm guessing that you probably weren't allowed to or able to play much during your professional football career for obvious reasons, a broken finger when you're batting or something like that, taking a slip catch, or behind the sticks. So you come to the end of that, and then you can re-engage your love of cricket as a player. People may or may not know that Nigel played at Old Modernians, now Leeds Modernians, in the northwest of Leeds, and now plays for Knaresborough Cricket Club in the York Senior League, still at 53, playing cricket actively. So you've got to be pretty fit still to do that. But having been a professional sportsman, when you go in the dressing room with the amateur lads who's one game a week, this is it, that's what they live for on a Saturday afternoon, is it all a bit sort of passé to you and, come on lads, it's not serious sport, or are you just as engaged as they are, or even more?
Probably more.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, it's 100 days today till the start of our cricket season, and that's my switch on day. So sort of from now, it's diet and fitness for me. So I have to get myself I get down to my playing weight when I was playing football, and I get fit and I get strong because I have to protect my joints because they're not as good as they used to be. So I get myself as fit as I can, and then when I'm playing the game, I'm as determined to win a cricket match as I was any football match. That's just in me. I'd like to say, maybe a few things have rubbed off onto players that I've played with, as in certainly enthusiasm for the game, because, you get lots of players, who play sort of cricket who are, they kind of care, but it doesn't really matter that much to them. And I try and get, that away from them and say, look, if you're going to turn up every Saturday, then why not give your best? Why not try and win something, be part of something that, that you win together, and, that's how you make your memories. And so I make sure my standards are as high as they can possibly be, and then, everyone else, can see that, and hopefully, that rubs off on them a bit.
Are you sort of a chunter, or do you put pressure on the officials then? Just to give you an example here from my own cricket life, I played with a guy called Graham Roop, who played for England in the 70s, and you're talking at the back end of his 50s by this time. He comes to play locally for a club that I'm playing at, and he was an absolutely lovely guy, great guy, not one of these who wanted to showcase his own career and talk about that all the time. He'd been very reluctant to sit here today, but when he got on the field with you, if he was bowling and he could nibble it about a bit and he wrapped the pad, everything was up there, just like he would possibly have been at the Oval in a Surrey or an England game or whatever, screaming at the umpire. And if he didn't get the decision, he'd be walking off down to wherever he was fielding afterwards. And regularly, as a skipper, I'd have to say to him, we're playing Saturday afternoon cricket here, Rupert. Just curb it a bit. Are you like that? Do you?
No, I hate injustice in sport. So if somebody dives and gets a penalty against you, it's horrible. I can remember Harry Kewell getting a penalty at Derby, maybe one of the first games of the season, in the last few minutes, and Ian Hart scored the penalty, and the lads came in and everyone was bouncing, the music was on, everyone was like, yeah, we're top of the league. I think we'd gone top of the league at the time, and it was hollow for me because Harry had dived. And I just don't like anything like that in sport. So in cricket now, if somebody nicks off, because I do keep wicket, so, if somebody nicks off and I appeal, if the umpire gives them not out and they don't walk, then, maybe I'm just reminding them that perhaps they should be a little bit more honest next time.
In that perfect position, just round about the right ear or whatever it is, left ear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And if I nick off, I walk. I wouldn't be able to not to. I just if I hit it, or if I know I've hit it, I'll just go. So that's the only thing that really riles me now. The only other thing is if I see players like on our team who give the impression they're not trying, I'll just say, hey, come on, you got to go for the full lot. It's not just a case of doing it for 20 overs and then wishing you were somewhere else, sort of thing. So.
Interesting. And you've not been tempted then to stick the green jersey on again and play for an amateur side? I mean, you've seen the shots of the Chris Waddles and the Trevor Brookings playing in the pub teams on a Sunday morning.
No, I couldn't do that. I finished with a stress fracture on my ankle, so I can't kick the ball. Running is really not a good thing. So
you're just a boundary hitter, are you?
So unfortunately not. No, I just obviously keeping wicket. There's just the running to the stumps. So every time the ball gets hit, whether it's whether they go for a run or not, I will still sprint to the stumps. I'm kind of a bit old school in that way, and I will run when I'm batting if I'm out there long enough to actually score any runs. So I'm happy to do that. I just get a very swollen ankle the next day. But if I was kicking a ball the way I'd have to kick, I couldn't do that. So football's sort of a no-no. If Leeds United were having an old man's game and wanted me to go, I'd happily play in it. I just I could side foot a goal kick to somebody and start from there. But kicking out my hands or anything would be a bit probably a bit too far.
What's happening for Nigel Martyn at the moment? What's life like? What are you doing? Bit of speaking, maybe?
A little bit of that. Got into that a little bit more sort of this year. Just going along to events and supporting different. I've done to a few cricket clubs and gone along and spoke for them, and then a few sort of football things that I did sort of last year, which I was happy to go along and support different events. So just have a chat about Q&A. I'm not going to stand up there and do a speech or do something like that. But I'm quite happy to do Q&A and answer any questions that supporters or people out there want to ask. I quite enjoy that.
And so if people want to get in touch with you or maybe an agent to engage you in this sort of pursuit for after dinner or something like that, an evening with Nigel Martyn, how would they do that?
Crumbs, I don't know, because it's so far just been people that I've known have just come up and said, would you do this for us? And I'll go, yeah, I'm happy to go and do that. So it's not like I'm putting myself out there necessarily, but I don't know the best way to contact, really.
If you want to hire him, then just email me on jd@jonathandoidge.com and I'll get in touch with him for you.
There you go.
He's a great guy. So listen, it's been a fantastic hour or so talking about those good old days. 23 caps for England, Euro semi-finals, UEFA Cup semi-finals, and a walker at cricket. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Nigel Martyn.
Thank you.